Hey everyone, hope you are doing well. And today in this deep dive, myself and John Creekmer, our senior wealth advisor, are going to dive into kind of a broader view of where we're at here in the economy, globally and locally, and where things are at in the commodity market specifically. And so, John, before we do that, though, how you doing today?
Doing great. You can probably tell my hair's kind of crazy today. It's a balmy 44 degrees in central Illinois, so I had my sunroof open, I had the windows down, driving around, taking in the the great spring air. So that was a lot of fun. So I'm glad to be seeing spring come around the corner and enjoying things. But it does make me, wonder with what's going on in the world, Drew, as far as the prices of things, inflation, and geopolitical events and wars and rumors of wars and prices of oil going up. I looked at fuel. So I drive a diesel. It was sitting at about 4.49 a gallon today. I saw gas in central Illinois is around 4.39. I'm not sure what it is out there in DC, um, but
Depends on where you're at, right? If you're across the border in Maryland, it's close to $5. If you're in DC, it's a little bit cheaper. So a little bit interesting to say the least. I also saw the wheat prices hit an all-time high in the commodities market. And we're going to talk commodities today. And John, I think it's a topic that we really haven't spent a lot of time talking
yeah.
about really over the last decade. And that's because commodities, the last decade really was a lost decade for commodity returns in terms of just a pure investment. So we have a great chart here showing commodity returns going all the way back to the 1970s. And I think there's a couple of periods that really stand out here. You have the period from 1970 to 1980 where commodity returns were just huge, which that is the most recent period of inflation comparable to what we have today. And then you look at the last decade from 2010 through 2020, where really there was hardly any returns, if at all, in the commodities market. And so, John, you've been doing this now for a couple decades here. What are your just general thoughts on commodities and how they fit into a portfolio?
Well, first of all, Drew, how would you define commodities? What all would go into that conversation? You think?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, right? I think that's precious metals like manganese or lithium. That's copper. That can be oil and gas. It can be wheat and grains. It can be a wide basket. Well, that's a general viewpoint that we take. We don't talk about one tiny commodity. We talk about the whole basket of commodities that are out there.
Right. So we have coffee in that
Yeah.
discussion. We have oil. We've got different we have gasoline futures. There's all different types of things as far as how it's used. We got wheat. Think about that. Russia invades Ukraine. It's on the other side of the world. What does it really matter? Well, they're what the second largest exporter of wheat in the world. Um, and some fields are on fire, so it's like, well, that's obviously going to affect wheat prices. And so when we think about historically, though, commodities are have been a place where people look to hedge. And whenever they say that, that means that the stock markets have been averaging 12% a year, and the commodity returns have been negative, so I average out to 8%. Well, that's not a real strong investment proposition. So the last 10 years, we've had, oh goodness, when I look at the chart, Drew, it looks like there's been one, two, three, four, five, 9 of the last 12 years have been negative as far as returns in a broad basket of commodities. And you may have seasonality, or you may have something which is more environmental. So if we have a huge freeze down in Florida, a deep freeze going all the way, stretch all the way down to, let's say, Orlando or Fort Myers, well, the price of orange juice might go up or things like that. But for broad-based year over year, returns have not been there. Now, the second half of last year, because of some economic events, because of political decisions, and then most recently because of decisions from both Russia and a little bit of China, we've been seeing commodity prices going up. So because of that, that's caused a bit of a shift in thinking as far as how do we actually invest money in portfolios, both to protect on the downside, but also how to make money on the upside. And so it's kind of one of these two flip sides that we have to look at. So I would say long term, we have to say what are we going to see the prices? What are we going to see the inflation? Are things going to go up for an extended period of time? If so, a commodity investment of some kind is probably a better play to be in.
Right, right. And so where we're at from an inflation standpoint, we know we have a upcoming interest rate increase in March, right? And we outside of that though, it feels like we're kind of behind the eight ball when it comes to combating inflation. So in this type of inflationary environment, are you kind of thinking that now is a good time to have some exposure to commodities?
Yeah, for sure. So the Federal Reserve's kind of been slow on things, and I know I've mentioned to a couple of folks in individual conversations. Uh, Remember a time when you would like pull up to a stoplight, you're behind another car, and the light would turn the light would turn green, and they're sitting there having a conversation with the person next to them, or they're on their phone talking, and all of a sudden it turns yellow, and so people start honking their horns, and it turns red. The signal indicated that they should go, and they sat there the whole time. And then all of a sudden, then the light turns green again. What do? Man, they just jam the gas down with the pedal and they fly out of there. They were talking at them, saying, "What are you doing sitting there? You should have been going." Well, it's kind of what we really kind of view from really an academic standpoint of the Federal Reserve. A lot of the indicators were really flashing that last year they need to be more proactive on finding ways to combat inflation. It really seems like from our position that they were kind of making more of a political statement. We're following reading political tea leaves and not increasing rates for a political reason. That's how it appears. I'm not going to say it for sure. It's supposed to be independent third party, but we know things become more and more political the last couple of decades. And so now all of a sudden it's like we need to raise interest rates 7 times this year. Well, the reality is with the war happening in Russia, with Ukraine, and not sure what that entire European complex is going to do, now they may end up slowing down those raises. So there's some talk of increasing by 50 basis points, 0.5% in March. Now it's kind of being signaled it's going to be about a quarter of a point, and we're just going to have to wait and see what happens in the rest of the year. So because of that, like you said, Drew, inflation is going to be there with us, and which means that commodity prices should trend higher.
Right. And so as long as we have the inflation bug on our shoulder, that's going to be a good thing for commodities as an investment in your portfolio, maybe not from a spending day to day, right? You also mentioned the geopolitical issues and how they impact a number of things. They impact inflation. They have some issues with supply chain disruption and supply and demand imbalances being furthered. And so, I think some of these charts that we're going to pop up here are really illustrative of what we're talking about. Russia and the Ukraine, they account for a third of the global grain supply. That planting season is upcoming, as we are very much so aware here in Central Illinois, in the next couple of months. And with what's going on in both of those countries currently, the chances of them actually planting their normal crops are very low. And so that's obviously going to impact the price of grains. We also know that Russia is a massive exporter of many things: oil, gas. They export 40 to 50% of the global neon supply, which John, I did not know this until I was doing research, but neon is one of the most critical elements for the making of semiconductor chips, which is really interesting because I was reading an earnings report of a company, Marvell, in the semiconductor space, and someone asked them, what are you guys seeing with your backlog? Are you catching up, or are you getting further behind and fulfilling your orders? And they said, hey, we're getting further behind. And so the issue with supply chains and chips, it's not getting better, it's getting worse in large part because of some of these geopolitical things that are happening. And so, John, how does that play into, is this more of a short-term shock, or is this a longer-term issue, what's going on geopolitically around the world?
Yeah, so I would say that we have a longer term trend line for demand of different precious metals and different commodity-based product. And so even if we look at just all the different, we'll say like global rare earth minerals, and so things that are used to build batteries, things that are used to propel electronic vehicles, things like that. There is an ongoing demand for those type of commodities. And that demand is increasing and increasing, especially as more governments are giving incentives for people to drive battery-powered cars and not fossil fuel-powered cars. And so with that, there was an ongoing rise in demand for some of those things. And if we look at the location of those minerals, was 80% of those type of rare earth minerals actually are mined out of China. And so if we have China and there's a geopolitical shock somewhere, let's say they invade Taiwan and then the global community comes out against that, they may end up saying, hey, but we control all the supply of these minerals, therefore prices are going to go up. The minerals that are used to make a lot of pharmaceuticals in the Western culture actually comes from China. And so when we think about that, those demands are going to be continuing to be there no matter what. But then all of a sudden, then we have a shock in the system. The first shock that really hit us was actually COVID. And when we think about that, it wasn't just a health issue, a pandemic, but it actually disrupted a lot of supplies and manufacturing and mining, and it caused a lot of issues as far as on commodity-based products. But now we have a secondary repercussion, which is Russia with Ukraine, and that entire Eastern Europe, complex is really a huge supplier and also a huge bottleneck of a lot of commodities. So those type of things will continue to be there. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to continue to see more and more geopolitical unrest, and that's going to push the price of the commodities higher, more so than even what we saw as far as with an increasing trend line that was there before these events unfurled.
And so knowing all these factors that are going on, we've added exposure to the commodity space. Now, John, we've not taken a passive approach with how we're doing this, right? We're taking more of an active approach with the fund that we're using. Can you kind of allude to why that is?
Yeah. We're seeing such rapid movements as far as in pricing within different commodities. So the commodity basket is so broad, right? There's so many different areas that are driven by so much demand. You have everything from consumption of food to making of bread to things that power vehicles to things that are needed to drive pharmaceuticals, to produce pharmaceuticals, to areas that are needed as far as for semiconductors or chips or power computers. So it's really varied, Drew. And so it makes a lot more managerial sense for us to say, let's actually partner with someone that manages the basket based upon what they're seeing in moment by moment demand trends within each of those individual spaces. So they have the ability to quickly, by having specialists track those different areas, they have the ability to shift from, let's say, oil to wheat to palladium to copper to gold, then back over to heating fuel based upon what they're seeing in trend lines from those small microaggression events that we've been talking about. So we've partnered as far as with a manager of a basket of commodities, and quite honestly, it's been performing very well since even before we started instituting it. But even since then, we're seeing acceleration to the upside.
Yeah. And so that's one that we're going to keep an eye on. We're going to keep an eye on this sector specifically. It plays into the whole picture, right? And we're always watching what's happening all around the world, both in economics, but in pricing, and how it plays into ensuring portfolios are in the best place. So, John, let's kind of transition here from the portfolio conversation. Let's talk about something else that's upcoming here on April 15th, and that's tax filing day. What are just some general thoughts for people to keep it in mind? It's a big topic. How do you use what is really a not fun day to your advantage in the long term from a financial planning perspective?
I'll tell you what, the IRS is one thing to remember. They're going to get you coming, or they're going to get you going. And so, no matter what, there's the code out there, and it's the Internal Revenue Code. And oftentimes, people consider taxes at the time in which they're filing their taxes. And so, we need to make sure we understand a couple of really huge distinguishing characteristics of two different words. One is tax preparation, and that's when you sit down by yourself or with your tax preparer and you look at history and you look to say what happened in the previous calendar year from an income standpoint and from an expense standpoint, and what things are deductible and not deductible. Let's simply report history. And the IRS has been so gracious to provide us with this wonderful little form with the numbers 1040, of which they say, please document all of that information here. And bada bing, bada boom, you now owe us X number of dollars. So that's tax preparation. That is simply a recording of what's happened in the past in history. Tax planning is something entirely different, and right now is a great time to be talking about it. Tax planning actually occurs throughout the entire year. We believe tax planning needs to be part of your overall fully integrated financial plan. And so, regardless of your age, you need to be considering what is it you're able to do right now to pay less taxes in the current year and also in future years. And so it's not just looking at what's best in the moment or what's best within this quarter or this year. It's saying what is best as far as the decreased taxes, given the environment that we're in and where trend lines are at. Now, there's a couple of things whenever you do that as far as in tax planning. Tax planning looks to the future. Tax preparation looks to the past. We believe that there's a huge tax tsunami coming. And that's kind of a big graphic thing, right? It's like a big wave of taxes coming at you. And so, but you really, when you recognize that, we know in 2025 for sure, taxes are going up because it's simply an expiration of the 2017 tax code that brought about change. Most of those changes expire in 2025. But with where we're at as far as with the national debt, all the additional spending because of COVID relief, and then in addition, we have some larger, I'm going to say military expenditures will probably come down the pipeline, in addition to aid going to different countries. We're probably going to see national debt continue to head to the upside. If interest rates go up, we know with the national debt where it's at, that is going to continue to have a higher and higher level of interest we have to pay, which will be added to the national debt. So because of that, we believe taxes will go up in the future. So you want to do all you can do to fully integrate tax planning into your overall financial plan. Now, you want to make sure that you navigate through the Internal Revenue Code. Internal Revenue Code really is about social engineering. It's about giving you financial incentives to make certain decisions. You give money to charity and that helps the greater good of mankind in your community. You can write that off as far as your income and save money on taxes. And so it's social engineering. What you don't want to do is what's called tax avoidance. And so just so you know, that's when you have a law on the federal books named after you. Um, you don't ever want to be in that situation. We don't want to steer you in that situation, but we really want to make sure we factor into your plan ways to decrease taxes now and in the future.
Yeah. And I know we're all guilty of this. I know I am. I think, man, I don't want to pay taxes, so I'm going to do everything I can to not pay taxes in the here and now. Well, that's pretty short-sighted, right? With that tsunami that you're alluding to. So what we would encourage people to do, if we haven't talked about it already, definitely reach out to someone with our firm, your advisor, Rachel, anyone that you talk to, and ask, hey, can we do the tax analysis for me? Make sure if I'm still working, I'm contributing to my 401k correctly, or if I'm getting close to maybe stopping working or doing a work optional lifestyle. Is there things that we can do to reduce my future taxation by moving money from my IRA to my Roth? Get in touch with us. We'd love to help you do that and figure that out. We have some great programs that really dig into the numbers and dig into the IRS's and the tax code to help us do that. And so, John, any final thoughts from you or encouragements for us as we go forward from here?
Yeah, sure is. So I would say this. There was a study that was conducted, over 1,000 respondents answered 20 questions as far as on their mental state, positive or negative. Then they had the respondents actually watch 3 minutes of the nightly news and then take the exact same 20 question survey again. And there was over a 27% increase in the negative responses to the exact same set of questions from the exact same respondents by watching 3 minutes of the nightly news. And so, what I want to encourage you is to be aware, check the source of where you're getting your information from, make sure it's based upon facts and that it's actually not biased and that it is truly, truly truth. And so, when it's truth, then you can depend upon it to make wise decisions and it's not a spin to bring about emotions. And so, I want to encourage you, continue to follow Drew and I here. All of the information we put out from Creamer Wealth Advisors are based solely upon facts and to give you actionable steps to think through and make sure you guard your mind in that way.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, if we said something today that triggers a question for you, by all means, reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you. Otherwise, we will stay here and we'll keep putting out great information for you to make the best decisions for yourself. Thanks for your time. Have a good one.